Hello everyone. Hope all of you are having a good day. In this class, let us try to understand the impact of minerals on global economy. We'll begin with the question, what is the value of world mineral production? Just have a look at this figure. A recent estimate suggests that the world fuel and metal production are worth about $4.2 and $1.3 trillion respectively, and industrial mineral production is worth about $550 billion. It's a very good indication of the role of mineral production in economic activity in any country is to compare the value of mineral production and gross domestic product. So if you want to understand what exactly is the role of mineral production or mineral industry in the economic activity of any given country, you just have to compare or you just have to relate the value of mineral production with the GDP, that is the gross domestic product of that particular country. So now that's a tricky one. You see, it is estimated that the raw mineral production makes up only a few percent of GDP in the developed countries, in the more developed countries such as the United States, the Netherlands, and Sweden, but reaches 7 to 12% in others, including Australia and Canada. So it is like very few percent of GDP, maybe around less than 2%. Uh, in the countries like US to 7 to 12% of GDP in countries like Australia and Canada. Norway holds the crown among developed countries with mineral production making more than 35% of the GDP. So it's Norway. Interestingly, such unusually high percentages are more common in some underdeveloped countries too, including Papua New Guinea and Zambia, which are major copper producers, and the Persian Gulf countries that supply most of the world's oil. So therefore, it is a mistake to conclude that countries are unimportant mineral producers just because raw mineral production makes up a small percentage of their GDP. For instance, the United States, whose raw mineral production makes up only for a few percent of its GDP, as I said earlier, is the leading world producer of many mineral commodities with a total value of more than 520 billion. And according to the US Geological Survey, the value added to the US economy by major industries that consume these minerals is about $2.44 trillion. So basically, United States has very limited contribution to its GDP in terms of its mineral production, but whereas in terms of the say for example the finished manufactured mineral exporters, it has a very huge contribution. So now that's interesting, isn't it? Now I would like you to hit the pause button on your computer and take a couple of minutes to check what is the share of your country's GDP in the raw mineral production. Try to compare it with the GDP share of the most developed and the least developed countries in the world. Write down the rational conclusion that you can derive from these numbers. So go ahead and do it. This exercise will greatly help you to plan your career as a mineral exploration geologist at the end of this course. Okay, moving ahead, let's look into propositions of few mineral economic theories. The first one is a classical theory, which holds, sorry for that, you have classical and modern theory. This we'll call it as mineral economic theories. Very interesting theories we have got here. So, what does this classical mineral economic theory proposes is it holds that economic activity depends on domestic mineral resource availability of a given country. According to this theory, as you can see in this particular figure, raw mineral exports occur early in a nation's development as mineral deposits are discovered. So we are talking about this particular curve over here. So early in the nation's development career, so the raw mineral exports plays a very significant role. Profits from these exports are used to build an industrial manufacture infrastructure which supports growing exports of goods manufactured from domestic raw materials. The important point to note in this theory is as mineral reserves dwindle or when it get reduced, imports rise in order to support the continued manufacturing. So you have basically in the beginning, in the earlier stage, you have enough mineral deposits discovered which controls the economy of the country, and these mineral deposits are used to develop the mineral based industries. But this is all according to the classic theory. As the mineral deposits dwindle, the mineral based industries which were dependent on these mineral deposits needs to be fulfilled with the raw materials, and the raw materials for these mineral based industries has to be imported from those countries which have the sufficient mineral deposits. Profits from these exports are used to build an industrial infrastructure initially when you uh, sorry for that, just a second. Okay, just a small problem with my pen. Anyways, okay, we continue. uh, Profits from these exports are basically used to build an industrial infrastructure, as I was telling, which supports growing exports of goods manufactured from domestic raw materials. The important point to note in this is as mineral reserves dwindle, imports rise in order to support continued manufacturing. So, many underdeveloped countries such as Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo could not keep up with pace at the start of this evolution, and now their national budgets and overall welfare are highly dependent on raw mineral prices. See, if you just observe in this particular diagram at the bottommost corner, bottommost left corner, you can see countries such as Congo, New Guinea, Namibia, Angola, and as you move towards the right side of the spectrum, you can see countries like Germany, Japan, USA, and UK on the other extreme. So, and if you just try to compare those countries, the spectrum of the countries with the graph just above that, you will see that countries like Germany, US, Japan, and UK, which are considered as more developed countries, they depend mostly on the processed mineral production. I mean, the economy of those countries mainly depend on the exports of processed mineral productions, and the mineral resources, they mainly depend on the raw mineral imports. Uh, See, many underdeveloped countries such as Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo could not keep up with the pace of the initial phase of this evolution, and they could not reach the other end of the spectrum. And because the prices vary unpredictably, the raw mineral prices vary unpredictably, these countries cannot control their revenues, a factor that limits their stable development. I mean, just look at the figure. The peaks of each curve corresponds with the countries given below. Countries that are least developed are on the left hand side, as I was telling, while the countries that are more developed are on the right hand side. It is depicted that the least developed countries depend on their raw mineral production and exports for the sustenance of their economy, while the more developed countries' economy is controlled by exports of manufactured mineral products. So this is all about classical theory and its proposition. It can therefore be seen that classical mineral economic theory predicts disaster for countries that lack raw minerals to support manufacturing and exports. Alternatively, there are few countries with limited or no mineral resources but yet have maintained a strong positive balance of trade. So, for example, in Japan, though lower wages and higher domestic productivity are often cited as the reasons for Japanese success, it is the less widely recognized Japanese raw material trade policies that did the job for them. Remember, it is the Japanese raw material trade policies. So, what does this policy say? The Japanese trade policy strategies to invest in mineral extraction projects throughout the world, which involves agreements to buy some or all of the production, thus ensuring orderly domestic supply of minerals. The modern mineral economic theory can be better illustrated using iron and steel as an example, as you can see in this particular figure. You are free to play with different minerals and evaluate this modern mineral economic theory, but remember to choose the right minerals for any one particular country. So as you can see in this figure, the Japan and Korea, both major exporters of manufactured goods, are heavily dependent on imported raw material. You can see in the first diagram, you have first part of the graph, you have Japan and Korea, the consumption and extraction curves, and you can compare that with South America, the extraction and consumption curves. The European Union is in only slightly better shape, whereas China, despite its major role as a raw mineral importer, is able to supply a much larger proportion of its needs domestically, in part because of its larger size and greater geological diversity. North America comes even closer to self sufficiency, and South America is a major source of raw materials. As I was telling, South America is the main producer, so its consumption curve is almost flat, whereas its extraction curve is somewhat steep. It is increasing, right, from 1970 to 2000. So if you just compare it with the other countries, you'll get a glimpse, you'll get an idea. So what basically the modern theory of mineral economics states. So uh, what modern mineral economic theory says is the pattern of mineral use is global, with the least developed countries supplying mineral raw materials to the more developed countries that manufacture goods and export them. So this concludes the first subunit of this economic geology course. But before I take off, I would like to say this. The exploration and mining industry is renowned for boom and bust cycles historically. However, there is always a long term ongoing need for discovery and for ore deposit evaluation, and hence for ore deposit geologists. In other words, exploration geologists, field geologists, or whatever names you used to call this category of geologists. The reason is simple: the modern comfort seeking technology oriented civilization cannot survive without the mineral resources. So each and every one of you have a better chance of success in the mineral industry if you plan your career ahead and acquire the necessary skills well in advance. See you all in the next episode on geology of ore deposits. Until then, have a nice day.